All right, we're getting into our flow this morning. Eoin is here.
Hey, Jer.
Nathan is here.
Good morning.
How are you, Nathan?
I'm very well. How are you?
The Liverpool reaction over the last week has been, Virgil van Dijk, greatest defender of all time, 60 not out, what a record. Fabinho, this team is even better than the team that won the league and the team that won the Champions League. They were smelling themselves, as somebody said in the show yesterday or the day before. I was like, that was an interesting turn of phrase. I must steal that. They were smelling themselves a bit, and then that's what happens. You get caught last night like they did. Were they lucky to get through, or on balance, actually, were the chances they missed about even? What happened last night?
I think the chances they missed were about even. They probably were smelling themselves a little bit. They did seem to be a little bit casual in how they approached the game. They obviously had a 2-0 lead from the first leg, and there is still a bit with Liverpool when they're not all at it, that they can be exposed a little bit more easily. But again, they created any amount of chances. They hit the woodwork 3 times. Mo Salah hit the post twice. They had 3 or 4 other gilt-edged chances to score in that game, which would have killed it off straight away. It would have been an interesting night if Alexis Sanchez hadn't been sent off within a couple of minutes of Lautaro Martinez scoring this absolute wonder goal. Then we might have had a fascinating final half an hour. But Liverpool weren't at their very best. Sometimes you got to scrape through. If they play like that against Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich in the knockout stage, they'll get beaten, they'll get knocked out. But you would expect, even Anfield, it wasn't one of those great European nights at Anfield. It never felt like one of those great European nights at Anfield. It felt as though people around the ground thought the job was done, that there was maybe that general disrespect that's there for Serie A at the moment, that they weren't expecting Inter Milan to come and pull off one of the great European comebacks. They thought that they were thinking about the quarter-final draw and who Liverpool are going to get in it, and that seemed to feed down into the players a little bit as well. But I would agree that I think Liverpool's squad right now is the strongest squad that Jurgen Klopp has had since he arrived at the club. The depth that he has, when you look at the Carabao Cup final and Joe Gomez, who was such a instrumental part of the championship winning side, didn't even make the squad that day despite being fully fit. Harvey Elliott wasn't in it initially. There is suddenly quite a lot of options for Jurgen Klopp.
Obviously, when you look at the scoreboard and having a 1-goal cushion, it kind of gives a sense that they scraped through. But I'm not sure that's the case. I think sometimes at the back, Liverpool, given obviously the high line that they play and given the way that they defend, it sort of gives off this mirage that the opposition team had a lot of opportunities, and they didn't. Even the goal that Inter Milan scored last night wasn't really a chance. I'd love to know what the XG was on Martinez's goal, because it's one of those that don't get scored, and people are criticising Van Dijk for standing off him a little bit. Dude's not going to score from there on the majority. He did, but these things happen in football sometimes, and I just think that there is this criticism of Liverpool of being quite open at the back recently, and I think that's fair enough. But I think that they are more than adept at being able to handle that.
What happens if somebody springs the offside trap in the Champions League final and it's like, well, it worked all season except in the biggest game, when a good team, a really truly great team, or when it's against Mbappe, who understands how the high line works, and do you know what I mean? It's it's grand against Danny Ings, but maybe when it comes to Kylian Mbappe, he won't be running offside as often.
Yeah, well, let's have that conversation then. But right now, I think it seems pretty fine. I don't think that there is any sort of issue at the back there. I think that.
But we've been having this conversation for years.
Yeah,
Liverpool play a high line and play it unbelievably well because they want to press high up the pitch. It relies on their front 3 players putting enormous pressure on the opposition's defence, so that every time they clear the ball, they can't pick out a long-range pass to a Kylian Mbappe or a Danny Ings, that all they end up doing is giving the ball back to Van Dijk or Matip or Konate on the halfway line, and Liverpool go again. That is why they play the high line. We know that. It's the way Jurgen Klopp wants them to press. There is a risk attached to it. And the one thing I do find is that it does give the other side a bit of momentum that maybe isn't really there. Again, as Eoin says, we talk about chances. Often you see at half-time against Liverpool chances the opposition have created, but 3 or 4 of them might have been offside. So not really chances that were created.
Do they get counted in the chances stats, or you're watching the video back?
They don't.
Yeah,
and they're not, because if the linesman, part of the problem for Liverpool obviously is that the linesman waits and waits and waits. So it'll end up looking like a real opportunity. But the sense that Klopp should change and suddenly play it deeper and not go with enough, I think everything would fall apart.
Well, I'm not saying
that.
Yeah.
Like, and I all I'm saying is that, like, it's just even in terms of like how you kind of like feel about watching Liverpool at the moment, as if, is there any jeopardy? And it sometimes feels that the idea of jeopardy is just an idea, that actually what they're doing at the back, they are in control, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Okay, and look, you can't take any micro trends from a couple of games recently where they've blitzed teams and looked really good and scored loads, and then there's been other games where they have looked a little bit lax, and for whatever reason that seems to be in the squad. I do wonder if they don't win this league, if they're going to regret that period of time where they allowed the gap to Man City to get so big, because Manchester City are going to buy a striker. We know that. We know that he has said it already. Maybe he leaves. Maybe that's the thing that evens this thing back up in the future, and Man City become a club who have less long-term strategic genius in charge. But like, that's, it's putting your hat on an event that won't happen. They definitely will buy a striker next season, and this was a year for this Liverpool team, who they keep telling us are better than the other teams that won the league and won the Champions League, to actually put it up to City more, like allowing City to get that lead. I remember having you on one Wednesday morning, maybe 2 or 3 months back, and you're like, well, this league is done. We always knew that Manchester City had it in them to do this. And I was like, well, Liverpool were a bit flaky to allow this to happen. And I still think Liverpool were a bit flaky, and I still think there's still a little bit of flakiness in the team when they're not quite sure what the identity is. Where are we the Thiago team? Or are we the non-Thiago team? And it's horses for courses a little bit. So I don't know.
But they've lost twice all season, so they're not that flaky. Like, Manchester City are setting a standard over the last 3 or 4 years that nobody has done before in terms of the amount of points you need to go and win a title. So, yeah, Liverpool may well have regrets, and we don't know what happened behind the scenes with Jurgen Klopp. Did he get players he wanted during the summer? Like, look at the impact Luis Diaz has made already. If you have Luis Diaz in that Christmas period, which if they don't win the league will be the one that cost them, where they drop points in 3 straight games. If you have Luis Diaz there to come in as a fresh pair of legs, does that change things? Maybe it does. But they are going up against one of the all-time great sides, which makes it incredibly difficult, because you can't afford to slip up. And they've done really well over the last while to stick at it, to keep City under pressure, to put it in a situation where maybe when they go to the Etihad in a month's time, they will still have a chance of winning the title. But they're not the perfect side, but then neither are Manchester City.
Yeah, like
City don't have that number 9. Liverpool couldn't do much more, and I think they're pretty sure of their identity. Yeah, they're trying to have a second way of playing at times with Thiago, but even when Thiago's playing, it hasn't dramatically changed. It changes how they hold on to the ball a little bit more. And that's a change over 3 or 4 years, that they hold on to the ball better than they did. But I still think it's that high press, the intensity of the front three, setting the tone for everybody else.
Like, what's the identity? Like, when the story is told of this Manchester City team at the end of the season, if they win this league, what will the story of it be? Will it be the Bernardo Silva team, which it was at the start of the year,
a strikerless team,
or is it the Kevin De Bruyne team that it becomes now? Like, I mean, the identity of Liverpool is pretty easy to nail down. It's the Mo Salah team. They've got the best player in the world, and everything that they've done in the Premier League that's been good this season has been pinned on Mo Salah. I think it's unfair to suggest that the midfield, having been chopped and changed, it speaks to some sort of lack of identity in Liverpool, because you could look at Manchester City and the changes that they've made, and they've been quite similar, actually.
Well, I don't know if they've been similar. I think that them not having a striker means that they are a team of those forwards, whoever it is in whatever period of time is on the top of their game. Because you'd say De Bruyne, I would say Mahrez has been as good this season as anybody that they've had, and he's been consistently good. He's been second fiddle all the time, but he's been a consistent second fiddle, and world class at that level. So we are nitpicking here, obviously, but at the end of the season, what does success look like for Liverpool now? Having said that they are a better team, they have a better squad than they had before, they have to win another trophy, a bigger one than the one they've won.
Yeah, and there's no point in a decade's time when we're looking back at this and Liverpool reflecting on the Jurgen Klopp era and saying, weren't we just unlucky that Manchester City were there at the same time? They do need to win trophies to reflect how good they have been. A Champions League, a Premier League, a Carabao Cup. is great, but is there even more greatness there? And there is still a chance they go and win the Champions League this season. There is still a chance. I still have City as strong favourites to win the Premier League, but it's hard to see what more they can do without going and doing what Manchester City did last season, which is not sign a striker, but still spend 100 million on Jack Grealish, who he's got better over the last few weeks since he's come back from injury, but hasn't had a massive impact. And City have been able to afford spending 100 million pounds on a player who hasn't transformed their team. Liverpool can't afford to do that.
Well, they could have. They chose not to. Their ownership chooses not to invest. Like their net spend. We know it's a strategic.
Their ownership is not a nation state, essentially.
No, but come on, neither is Manchester United, and they've managed to spend $1 billion over the last while. Like this whole kind of Liverpool couldn't afford to sign players. It's not true. They chose not to. Their ownership chose not to. Whoever's making the argument to John W. Henry did not win that argument. Like that's the case of that. It's not like we couldn't have signed Grealish. They could have signed Grealish if they wanted 100 million. They could go and sign Kylian Mbappe. They could go and sign anybody in world football. They are rich enough to be able to do that and to absorb that. We've seen they spent the money on Alisson. We've seen they spent the money on whoever in the past, Van Dijk and Salah at the time. Like they've got plenty of money. They choose not to spend it.
Yeah, and I know the argument that always comes back from Liverpool supporters is that the Alisson Van Dijk came from the Coutinho sale, so that they've never had a track record of spending that sort of money. But I've made the point before that Liverpool won the league not because of signing Salah or Mane and improving the Klopp got. They won the league because they signed the two best players in the world in their position, arguably, in Alisson and Virgil van Dijk. And are they willing to go and do that again in a different position? So are they in the mix for Erling Haaland? It doesn't seem so. Are they in the mix for Kylian Mbappe? It doesn't seem so. So if Jurgen Klopp, he would be well within his rights to be throwing his toys out of the pram, saying, look what I have done. I have brought your club back. Why aren't you giving me these players? Look what happened when you spent 70 million on Virgil van Dijk or on Alisson. I made them even better again. I brought a Champions League, a Premier League title. Give me the money. But from the outside, that doesn't seem to be how Klopp approaches things. He seems happy to bring in a Luis Diaz and make him better. Albeit we're working off 4 or 5 games. But again, bringing him in for not 80, 90 million, not the finished article, and making him better over 2 or 3 years, and enjoys that challenge. But it does mean that when it comes down to a Premier League title race, it'll get to 90 points. That's where your Kylian Mbappe can come in quite handy.
Still £40 million, they shelled out on him. It's not a huge degree of moneyballing it. I think they were pretty certain that this thing was going to be a home run almost. Like, and they did sign Konate last summer as well, which was one of the issues that they had last season, was where's the depth at centre back when the injuries happened. So there was a bit of remedial action. I'm not sure if in hindsight, that they'd look back on some of the business they've done over the last 12 months and say, God, we really regret it, because they win their game in hand. They're 3 points off Manchester City, and Manchester City, as we've already discussed, have been heralded as sleepwalking through the league and still winning it at a canter.
Okay, we'll come back to this a little bit later on. If you've got a view on it, you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream, youtube.com/offtheball. Remember to hit subscribe on the YouTube button.